Welcome to the Into Novus Knowledge Agronomy Podcast, your go-to resource for agronomic insights, technology solutions, and ongoing education. At Into, we combine agronomic expertise from soil analysis to best practice application methodologies to provide a holistic view for your yield optimization. Our focus is on practical strategies that improve efficiency and drive better results in the field. Join us for interesting discussions, expert advice, and the latest advancements shaping modern agriculture. Whether you're in the field, on the road, or at your facility, we're here to keep you informed and ahead of the curve. Welcome to our first Into podcast. So I'm Nick Monnig. I'm an agronomist in Central Missouri for Novus Ag, joined today by my colleague, Derek Cottrill. We're just two agronomists working for Novus Ag, and we just wanted to provide some proactive agronomy tips or agronomy information throughout the season. So appreciate you guys listening. Look forward to doing this every 2 weeks throughout the growing season. Derek, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Welcome everybody. And like Nick said, my name is Derek Cottrill. So Novus Ag agronomist. I support our Northwest Missouri locations. I have LLCs I support in Wathena, Kansas, Maitland, Thompson River Ag in Trenton, Tri-County Ag in Maitland, and Premier Ag in Albany, Bethany, and Stanberry.
You know, I guess as far as quick updates throughout the geography, Derek, Central Missouri, if you go West Central Missouri right now, the day we're recording this, April 11th, there's a lot of planting activity that's getting kicked off, and we should have a lot planted by this time next week. You go into Eastern Missouri, things are still pretty wet. Not a lot happening there. What about you, Derek?
Yeah, no, things are really starting to ramp up finally right now. And I say finally, right? We're still on the front end, not behind by any means. I think some guys get a little feeling that they're getting a little bit later just because we are probably a week behind last year, but some wet weather at the end of last week kind of prevented any field work till the beginning of this week. And for the most part, over these last couple of days, guys are really getting going with getting some crops in the ground. So pretty much from here on out, it's go time for most guys. So
I guess just to try to keep things brief, we just had a few things that were somewhat top of mind, I think, for most growers right now. One, just, hey, we're planting today, corn and soybean emergence. When's that going to happen? When are we going to see the crop out of the ground? And then we want to touch on a little bit about herbicide plans. How do we execute early and make sure that things stay clean the rest of the year? So I think that one of the biggest questions, I get this time of year when we're planting a crop from growers is just, I'm planting my corn or my soybeans today. When will I see those come through the ground? Can we predict that? With corn, everything corn, soybeans wise, a lot of times early on is driven by GDUs or growing degree units. And I don't need to go into all of that, but that's based off of temperatures. Corn is a GDU driven crop. Soybeans, obviously, when it comes to reproductive, it's photoperiod driven, but emergence is growing degree unit driven. So for corn, it takes roughly 120 GDUs to come out of the ground. Soybeans more like 90 to 130, so kind of a wide range there. But Derek, I was running the numbers, Columbia, Missouri, which would be kind of close for my geography. If someone planted around there yesterday, that means by Easter Sunday, they should have 120 GDUs. And by then, we should start seeing some corn come out of the ground. So that's only 10 days roughly from planting. That's really ideal, in my opinion, this time of year. If I can get that crop out of the ground within 2 weeks at this time of year in April, I think we're doing really good. Soybeans should start emerging around this time as well. Could be a day before, or it could be a day or two after, but very similar. I don't know. I think you've run the numbers for Northwest Missouri too, Derek.
yeah, I here recently and really seeing surprisingly some of the same numbers as you are. I know our geographies, me being a little bit further north, it sometimes seems like you're a week and in some cases 2 weeks ahead of us. But running the numbers, for that Albany, Missouri area, if you were to plant, yesterday, the forecast on GDUs, it was looking over the next 2 weeks, accumulating somewhere around 160. So you'd be hitting that 120, 130 mark right around that 10-day range. So that kind of falls in hand with what you're seeing out there in terms of in your area in terms of GDU accumulation. And I also looked, as a trial scenario I'm involved in where we got some beans put in on March 26th. So a little over 2 weeks now, and fully expected with earlier planning like that. Those beans have not emerged, but even tracking those, I think those have now accumulated somewhere around 110, 111 GDUs, and so they're still right on track, germinated fine, and things like that. But they're just going to be in the ground just a little bit longer, but still on track. So you know, I earlier plannings, it's important just to be patient. Like you said, that 10 days is certainly not abnormal or a problem at all. But in some cases, it could be just a little bit longer than that. But I think that's okay. That's, when we talk about seed treatments and protecting that seed, I think that's where those bring a lot of value with these early planting dates, the longer that seed sits in the soil. But as long as we have that protection, they're going to be fine. So.
Yeah, I think the way the forecast looks, I mean, it looks like an ideal forecast to me right now, at least the geography I'm in for ideal planting. Weather, there always could be some pop up showers that show up, but right now, the next 2 weeks, there's not a lot of chance of rain. And what chances there are, they're not calling for a lot. Yeah, the temperature is going to rise this weekend and drop down for a couple days, but then it comes back up close to 70. I think it looks like a really ideal window. And the thing I always kind of come back to, I try not to get too opinionated on planning time this time of year because I've seen people do things according to the textbook and it doesn't work. I've seen people do things completely opposite of the textbook and it works out totally fine in the end. To me, it's really all about soil conditions. Is the soil fit to plant or not? And if the soil is fit to plant, I don't get as worried about soil temperature, especially if the forecast is there and we're going to warm back up. I just really like to have a good fit soil and then have a couple days on that seed before it starts raining is really ideal. But to me, in my whole career, if you're planting into a fit soil, you have a little bit of cushion if you have some other adversity in terms of temperatures, in terms of forecast.
I'm agree with you 100% there in terms of our, what does it mean for a soil to be fit for planting? And a big part of it for me is what I'm kind of asking is the soil dry enough? Like we want to, yes, I want you to plant at a depth and I want it to be you to plant into some level of moisture so we can meet our requirements that the seed needs for germination purposes. But typically, if it's unfit, what we're saying there is that it's too wet, where we're going to be creating sidewall compaction issues and things like that. As long as we're not too wet, I'm just like you. I'm not concerned about temperature anymore, unless maybe I had a particular variety with a cold germ test that was poor, but anymore. Yeah, I've been taking soil readings as I've been scouting some fields over the last few weeks, and I'm getting readings anywhere from low 50s to mid 50 soil temps right now, which you mentioned the textbooks and things like that. They'll say optimal temperatures for beans and things like that is 60 or above anymore, especially with the seed treatments on there, things like that. And we know the value that earlier planting can bring in both corn and beans. Temperature alone is not my deciding factor of when we should be planting. It's, are we dry enough? Are we going to get good seed to soil contact? Things like that.
So flipping from that planning piece of it, Derek, we start when planning happens fast this time of year, which in the western part of my geography is happening relatively quickly now, and it'll happen quick over the next week or so. When that happens fast, herbicide applications sometimes they take the back seat. So I guess really the question becomes then how do we ensure we have a successful herbicide program under situations like this where we're planning in a hurry? I I don't know what you think, but I think 24 taught us a lot, and I think one thing it taught us on the weed control piece is that we're gonna have to be proactive. Now, I think a great point that you've brought up, which is proactive means something different for every operation. It's not all the same, and so I guess I thought one way we could go about this is I got to ask you some specific scenarios. Some things that we're seeing this year we tend to see year after year, and kind of how do we handle those, Derek? So if we roll into say we're going to plant a field, it's got a fall applied herbicide down, or we've clean tilled it, it's got a clean seed bed. What's the best way to handle that first herbicide application in corn? To me, especially if it got a fall herbicide, because this is a lesson we learned last year, and we plant clean.
And honestly, in that that scenario, you're exactly right. That proactive, being proactive, and we say all the time, I think we simplify weed control by saying, well, it's easy, hit small weeds and use residuals, don't let them emerge. Well, that means something different for every grower in his particular scenario type thing. But this scenario that you're describing here is planting into a clean seed bed is probably the best one you can be in. And so I guess in this scenario, I would just make sure that we're capitalizing on the fact that we're there. I try to encourage the growers I'm working with in this scenario to look at that clean seed bed that you planted into as an opportunity to stay ahead of those weeds, not as an opportunity of, well, I got clean fields right now. I'm going to get planted. I can spray later. I don't have any weeds out there. Something like just a lay-by residual treatment on black dirt can bring a ton of value to your program, and essentially take maybe your early post one pass person, incorporating just a simple lay-by treatment that are typically relatively cheap because we don't need burn down AIs in there. We don't need adjuvants and things like that in there. Putting that down, when we're going to be able to spray a post application isn't guaranteed because we're at the mercy of Mother Nature and everything else we got going on. But what is a guarantee is that those weeds will emerge at some point. And by getting that at a bare minimum, a lay-by treatment down at planting on your clean soil is going to, at minimum, buy you flexibility on that post window, put less pressure on our post application, and just increase the chances that we're going to have success. So, we've talked before. Every year we're going to find fields towards the end of the season that we got weeds poking up through beans or in between the rows and corn late in the season. And my thinking back on those, and 95% of those weed scenarios we see at the end of the year were typically the result of getting behind at some point in time throughout the season. And so in situation, if I'm fortunate enough to be planting into a clean field, take advantage of that and do something to make sure you staying ahead of weeds at that point.
Yeah, to me, I think the big thing that I think taught a lot of the growers I worked with last year is that when you plant clean after a fall herbicide treatment, you can't get lulled into sleep into thinking that it's going to stay clean. While fall herbicide does take care of that winter annual weed mat, which allows us to get more residuals down to control things like water hemp. Outside of that, it really has no activity on water hemp. That program is not focused on delaying water hemp emergence. So it's one thing to your point. You got to be ahead of water hemp emergence, which means we need to put a residual down. And like you're saying, if your two pass program is proven year in, year out to be the best, but if you're a one pass post guy, even just putting a little atrazine or something down just as a residual to hold the things back until you get to your big residual program on the early post pass. Derek, I know another one, and this one's going to happen some this year. I know too. Didn't get anything done last fall. No fall herbicide down. I'm no tilling corn now. I'm just going to no till it into the west mess of winter annuals that I've got. Now, what do I do from a herbicide standpoint?
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a lot of that, even especially this year, and fall work was limited for a lot of people. And then we do stress from an agronomic standpoint early planting dates, whether that's corn or beans now, and we know extending that growing season is important. So yes, we want to get our crops in timely, but putting priority on weeds, something that we know is a guarantee, something that we know is can be extremely yield limiting. I think you got a couple options there that you have to think about in that scenario. And both can be successful, but in my opinion, one is going to be more challenging than the other. And so if I'm in a situation now where I'm wanting to get my crop no-tilled and I got a thick, dense mat of winter annuals out there today, your two options in my mind are option one, spray now and delay planting. And to me, that would be the more proactive, putting priority on staying ahead of weeds over planting date. Because again, that planting date becomes irrelevant if a month from now it's full of weeds, right? Um, so that would be option one. Option two, go ahead and plant into those weeds and spray later. Now, I've said this and I've heard many people say for a long time now with soybeans, if you plant beans into water hemp, mare's tail, things like that, you're probably going to harvest into at least some water hemp and mare's tail. And anymore, considering we use virtually the same chemistries in beans that we do corn, same weed spectrums, that's kind of my rule of thumb with corn. I'm not saying you can't plant into weeds and do an early post one pass and things like that, but at a minimum, in any case, planting into weeds, you're going to increase the odds that you're going to be chasing weeds or harvest into some. So if you choose option two and go ahead and plant, um, that can still be successful, but you're going to have to be much more diligent in monitoring that application because your window of application on that post side, once that crop's in the ground, is going to get smaller and smaller. And so if I come in and I spray after I plant, I'm going to be on that to make sure I get complete control and determine as soon as possible, do I need to come back in again? Because if we make that application, then get comfortable, well, we've made our app, and then find out 3 weeks later that we didn't get everything cleaned up, then by then, our crops V3, V4, the weeds are starting to take yield, and now we've never can get ahead of the weeds type deal. And so you got option one, option two, but if you're going with option two, you're going to have to be a lot more diligent. You're going to have a lot less flexibility on the post side to get anything cleaned up if you need to, and also keep in mind, if the weeds are that thick and dense and you go in there and you plant and you run over them and you smash them and you cut them all up with a planter and things like that, going in with a herbicide app with, a burn down application within a day or two on weeds that are dinged up and not really growing typically results in a bunch of half dead weeds. So keep that in mind. If you're going to decide to plant, that might even mean you need to delay your herbicide burn down another week or so. But again, now our post herbicide application timing just keeps getting smaller and smaller. So again, every scenario is going to be different, but I would highly, encourage you to at least consider going ahead and spraying now, even if that means delaying planting for a few days.
Always better to be proactive management. I don't like to plant into a mat like that whenever I'm no-tilling corn. I'd rather go out there a couple weeks ahead of time, like that window we had late March, and get those things killed. But the agronomist in me that comes out is the seed side of me. I want to get that crop planted in an ideal window, and so I'll take care of cleaning it up later but I don't want it to get too late. So to your point, like try to get it taken care of as quickly as you can without sacrificing weed control. I think one other thing, just to make sure people understand on that planning into a mess of winter annuals with corn, there's been work done up north that shows corn starts to reduce its yield potential before it even comes out of the ground. If it's in a mess of weeds like that, it can sense the weed competition before it even emerges. So that's why I never think it's a great idea to do that now. I know I've seen decent yields come off of stuff like that that's happened, but it's not something I'd want to make a point of doing year after year. So I think to your point, proactive management, especially important in corn.
So what, and so Nick, those are a couple of good scenarios, common ones we run into, and I'm sure there's plenty more with weed control. But I guess the take on with weed control would be right now. Um, there's a lot of depends when it comes to the best weed control program. It depends on that program and that particular operation. But I think the point here we're seeing is think about what we're doing right now in terms of weed control is going to impact in some way, shape, or form how, what, and even if we're chasing weeds here later on in the season. So think about what you can or don't do and how that's going to impact weed control. But one big take home for me right now in this point in the season is to keep in mind that anything we're doing right now in this time of the season is going to potentially impact our next steps in our management program. My example I give there is our planting dates. Early planted soybeans become more and more common. Historically, beans typically getting planted later than corn and things like that. But now, for example, I had a case last year of April 1st planted beans that were nearing R2 on June 4th. So they're in reproductive stages. We're not far from, fungicides reproductive apps. And historically, early June hasn't been our key timing for reproductive apps of nutritionals and fungicides and things like that. But my point being is as we adjust things here on the front side, what we do here over the next couple of weeks, think about how that changes. You got a management plan you've been making over the winter. Do you have to adjust those timings and implement those differently? Because you can have the best plan put in place, but timing is so critical. And if we have beans going anywhere from April 1st to June 1st, where obviously there's going to be, that key timings are going to vary differently because the crop demands of a bean that was planted on April 1st versus June 1st is going to be dramatically different, right? And so, my big takeover for guys right now, at this point in the season is stay flexible. Yeah, it's important to have a plan right now, but I think even more important is the ability to recognize the time where we need to make adjustments to that plan to, Mother Nature and other unforeseen circumstances or things that we can't control are going to have much less impact if we're willing to make adjustments as we go through the planning season here. So, encouraged to do that. And if you're not sure if it needs to make adjustments, that's what people like Nick and I are here for. Your local retail partners you work with, have these discussions with them. This is why Nick and I have these discussions. Everybody has some ideas we're not thinking about. But being able to be flexible right now, we still have that opportunity. That's why this time of the year is exciting, because yield potential is still there, and it's about as high as it's ever going to be right now. And we still are an opportunity. We can make some adjustments if we need to.
Those are great points, Derek. I guess one thing just to flip back real quick is one of the other questions tends to come up on soybeans this time of year. Plenty of people plant early this year. They've seen the fruits of that labor for several years now, so there's not a lot of argument there. But there's still a guy or two that maybe is thinking, I'm not going to plant for another couple of weeks, so I'm not going to worry about burning this down. I would just add the point that proactive management in soybeans is very critical as well. I think you would be surprised if you put a residual, something longer lasting like a sulfentrazone or a Valor or something in there. You'd be surprised how well it holds stuff back until you get that crop planted and you get your next residual down. Plus, the other thing I'd argue with people is we tend to have more rainfall this time of year to get that herbicide activated versus we may wait till May 1st and then we'll try to do it then. And then we may not get a rain for a few weeks and then it doesn't activate that herbicide anyway. So we were all worried about burning up residual time and we never got it activated to start with. So always in my career, proactive management, corn and soybeans, always better than trying to be more reactive. So some great points on the herbicide piece of it there, Derek. I think gave some people some things to think about in terms of emergence. When are we going to see the crop that we're planting now? How do we handle herbicide programs? Definitely, to your point, proactively. And there's some ways that we can make that even more successful. So greatly appreciate all you guys listening today. Hopefully you'll find it beneficial. We're going to do this every 2 weeks throughout the growing season just to try to help you get a little 14-day look ahead on maybe what you should be thinking about next time. So we appreciate you guys listening today, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us. This podcast is brought to you by Into Novus Knowledge. Please reach out to your Into agronomist if we can help in any way. Join us next time for more in-depth agronomic advice.